Hi everyone, it's Janet and welcome to my craft room. Well, today is the second episode in my spring journal, and here is the journal that I actually put together in episode 1. And let's take a look at the page we're going to make. There's actually 2 pages. This first page, though, is kind of together. We've got the little bunny standing on the front porch with all of the decorations, and when you flip it over, we can see the back side of the bunny and this collage of flowers and vines and mail. In the front it says bloom, and that kind of suggests what this is going to be about. It's going to be about flowers and spring and all the things that go with it. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is use this front porch stamp, and I'm going to apply some Memento ink because Memento is very friendly for Copic or any kind of alcohol markers. So if you're going to use Spectrum Noir or some other brand besides Copic, the Memento ink line will work very well. Here I'm using Tuxedo Black. So let's look at this image. I'm going to actually trim it down a little bit. I'm not going to do this last brick on the front porch because it's just a little too wide for my taste for the page that goes into the journal. So as I color this, I'm not going to do that last step. So I pulled out these grays C00, C0, and C1, thinking I would use all 3 of them on my front porch. But in the end, I really only used C1 to color this porch, and it's just very little bit of shading. You can really see I'm not doing a lot here. And because C1 is so light, I really didn't need to further lighten it down. If you are looking for some ideas about how to color this front porch to give it more dimension, then the shadowing is what you need to figure out. And I highly recommend, if you don't have a good feel for it, just follow what is shown on the Art Impressions packaging for this stamp set. If you follow that, you're golden. It's going to look dimensional and it's simple to do. Next, I'm going to work on the brick stoop. So this is using E35, E57, and E59. The darkest color is E59, and I'm going to use this to put in shadows. This gives it some depth and dimension. The next color is the mid-tone of E57, just a little bit lighter, and I'm spreading that darker color out and blending it in. And then finally E35 to fill it all in. And you can see it gives a nice dimensional look. I'm using my fine point micron pen to add little dots over this brick area, and it just makes it look a little more uneven and less like the brick is completely smooth. And most brick does have some texture on it, and it just makes it look more interesting, frankly, and a little bit more realistic. So the next thing we're going to do is just cut this out using the included die with the set. And I used, by the way, the Best Ever Craft Tape from Spellbinders. I do recommend that. It does a great job and doesn't rip up your paper. So this is the result, and it cuts out all the windows for you. So that's why I didn't bother to do any window coloring. So what I'm going to do instead is put some blue paper in the back so that it looks like the windows are blue and reflecting that pretty color. So this is a very, very light blue. And I'm going to cut a piece out, kind of an L shape, that's going to fit just nicely behind the windows, but doesn't show through when the door is opened. And then I'll glue that in place. You could be a lot more precise about cutting this background paper, but I'm just holding it and freehand cutting it. It just has to be close, and if I'm a little bit too big or too small, I can adjust. All right, so now you see that upside down L shape I mentioned, and I'm going to test fit this and open the door. Now a little bit of the blue shows, but before I trim any of that off, I'm going to burnish the score line in with my tool. This does, put the line in with the die, but I just like to make sure it's well burnished and opens and closes easily. And after I did that, moved it around a little bit, it did fit quite nicely. I only had to trim this little bit off at the top so it wouldn't peek past the top of the door. So at this point I can add the glue around the windows, and then I will place that blue piece on top and just check to make sure that it's not showing anywhere around the borders of the openings. So when I open it, there's no more blue and my windows are perfectly in place. Now I'm using a little bit of Jelly Roll white pen to put squiggles in these windows, and that's to represent some reflection. I'm going to show you a close-up of it because you really can't see that here. There you go. See that reflection? It's such a small thing, but it really adds to the overall look of this front door. And now I'm bringing out my Y38, which is kind of a golden yellow, and I'm going to use it to color the doorknob and the plate behind it. This gives it kind of a brassy looking feel to it. And because it's such a small little area, I'm not going to do more than one color. It's just not necessary, at least for my taste. It gives the viewer an idea of what it is, but it doesn't need to be that complicated with multiple colors. All right, so I've now trimmed off that extra brick on the front stoop, and it fits really nicely on my page. And I don't think that losing that one step is really noticeable. Anybody who doesn't know that you've done that is not going to look at it and say, hey, that's not quite right. So sometimes you just have to adjust the stamps to fit your need, and this is an easy way to do it. In this case, just trim that off a little bit. Okay. This looks pretty good so far on this page. And I'm going to trim out the door using my finger blade. I'm just going to use the edges of the stamped image to align my blade as I cut through. So I'm going to cut all four sides, matching corner to corner, just being careful. It's pretty easy actually, and the finger blade makes the control very, very easy. And the idea here is to cut this window through it so that we have an opening on the back side of the page, which then we can decorate and use for the page too. So we flip this over. This is the back page with the window cut in it. I have a frame and a page die, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But first I want to show you this paper pad. This is the Valentine's Day Art Impressions paper pad. It's two-sided, and you can see there's a lot of things in here that don't necessarily scream Valentine's Day. There are some really pretty florals, there's some plaids, there's a green, there's sprinkles, there's all kinds of really kind of spring related, in my opinion, papers. So I'm going to use this in a good number of my pages. Now AI has a spring paper pad coming out, so I hope to get a hold of that to be able to add some of that in this journal too, but we'll see. If not, then I think this Valentine's paper pad will work really great in it too. Now this particular die I'm using comes from the Journal Templates die, and it has a couple different page options. This is one where the entire shape is scalloped, and I thought this would be pretty on it. So I will go ahead and attach that to it. Now, as you can tell, I'm going to put it right over the window, and then later I'm going to cut that out. So as far as applying this to the page, I'm only going to apply it on the edges. Don't want to put glue in the middle because we are going to be cutting this out. So just leave that middle without any glue at this point. And do your best to center it. It is a little tricky. I don't know. I have a lot of trouble centering things. And I always have. I'm just really not that great at it. But do the best you can. That's what I do. Now I've got this polka dot paper showing through the window on the front or the first page. So I'm just going to trim this out very similarly to how I trimmed out the door to begin with. Just using my finger blade. And that will pop that piece out. And again, we'll leave the window on the back side. Now this pretty frame, this is part of the set. It's number 5588 Journal Oval Frames, and I thought it would be cute here. And I just used the back side of the same page of paper. Remember I told you this pack is all double-sided, and you can see on the back side it's the same paper pattern I'm using on the main page, but flipped over I'm going to be using it as the frame. Now the inside of this frame I did keep because I think I can use that somewhere else in the journal. So keep that in mind when you're making your journal pages and you do things like frames. You might be able to repurpose those things that initially maybe look a little bit like they're wasted. So now I want to show you the variety of images that I stamped. to decorate these first two pages, and I'll show you where they come from. First of all, I'm using the Front Porch Valentine's set for several of the images. And it includes these envelopes. There's a rectangle one and a square and also a cute mailbox, kind of an old-fashioned one. And then I've also got this pot of tulips that I want to include. So that again is all coming from the Valentine's Front Porch set. The next set I'm going to show you is the Front Porch Easter set. There's a few images from here that I've picked up as well. There is the birdhouse, and then also I've got this stool with a pail and a bunch of daffodils. So again, that is the Easter Front Porch set. And then finally I'm going to be using the garden set, and I'll show you those images. I've got the wreath that I want, and then also a couple of the vines that has flowers on it, as you see in this. So again, that's the Front Porch garden set. Now the bunny images, that's a new one. It's 5732 bunny front back. So as the name suggests, you cut them out and you glue them together so you have the front of the bunny and the back of the bunny. We'll see that in more detail later. But that particular stamp set is new, and they decided to hold that one off another week, and that is why this video is a week later than I intended, because I didn't know they were going to do that, and I couldn't show it. Just one of those things that happen. So we're going to start coloring here. If you were watching as I was talking, you'll notice that I use C1 on this bucket. I'm trying to recreate sort of a tin bucket, if you will. So I used C1 to kind of do the initial shading, and now I'm going back with C3 and adding some deeper color on the edges so that it has a more rounded appearance. For this journal series, I'm going to be using Copic markers, but you can certainly use any kind of alcohol markers you like. You just would pick similar color combinations. So feel free to substitute as you have. Also, I'm making, for example, this stool to be brown. You might decide you might want it pink or red or blue, so please substitute any kind of colorations that you like. What I want to do in this journal series is use pretty simple color combos. A lot of times I will only use 1 or 2 colors. Sometimes I use 3, like I'm doing right here on this stool, but a lot of times I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Those of you who are more skilled with using alcohol markers, you already know kind of what to do to get more depth and dimension. But a lot of the feedback I've been getting are from people who are just starting out with alcohol markers, whether it be Copic or another brand, and they really just are looking for some basic skills. So that's what I'm trying to do with you here, is to show you some basic things that you can practice on and gradually build your confidence, because these markers aren't, they're not really that hard to use. You just need to know a few tricks and tips. It's like everything else. And then add a little practice and you'll start getting the results that you really are looking for. And if you're really enthused about it, then I encourage you to find classes that you can take. There's a lot of great online classes that you can subscribe to and get some training on, and that really can help you as well if you really like using these markers. Okay, I'm going to speed this up quite a bit now, because if I were to do this all at regular speed, we'd be here for an hour or more, and I don't think most of you want to be here that long. So I just will tell you that right now I'm filling in the leaves and the branches that go up to these daffodils with G07. And now I'm using Y35 for the daffodils. I'm using those on the petals. And then I'm going to use a deeper Y38 for the center of the daffodils. And there was one that I just missed, so you'll see me filling that in at the last second. I'm going to start working on the envelopes using C1. For this rectangle, I'm putting it where the seams and the flap are, and then for the square, I'm just shading it on one side. Then I'm going to bring in R29, which is that red again, and put in the little heart that's on the rectangle envelope and the stamps on the squares. I'm going to work on the mailbox. I'm using C3 in this case, and I'm going to outline the front or the foreground of that box, and then use C1 for the background of 3 sides, leaving that 4th side blank just to give it a little bit of an idea of a reflection. And RV23 is what I used on the seal of the mailbox. Bringing back R29, I am dabbing, not coloring, but just dabbing these little flowers. They're so tiny. Trying to color them in might be a little bit difficult to get perfectly, so I decided to go the dab route. It gives it kind of an organic feel. And then I'm using G07 for all the leaves in the vine. I won't try to color the vine itself, just the leaves. And then I'm going to use a little bit of RV23 and dab the flowers again. So where there was white, there will now be this light pink, and then it will look like it's a little bit two-toned. So I like how that turned out. Now the next one I'm going to work on is the wreath using R29 again, and I will use these same colors over and over again throughout the journal. So if you are buying these colors, I'm trying to limit the number that you'll need. So R29, I've picked out all the colors that are kind of these bigger, larger flowers. Then Y35 for the center of those flowers, and then these kind of chrysanthemum looking flowers. I used Y35 and then Y38, just dabbing in a little bit of darker shade to give it some more dimension. RV23 for the tiny little flowers, and then B02 for the roses. I know blue roses are kind of odd maybe, but I like blue roses, so that's what I use. I had them in a corsage once and I really loved them. So anyway, this is G07, and what I'm doing here is coloring about half of each leaf. And then I'm going to use the lighter G to fill it in. And this will just automatically give it a little bit of coloration. You'll see the difference between the dark and the light. It's not much. It's a very easy technique for such small little images, but it just gives it more life when you have a couple different colors in there, a darker and a lighter. Next, I'm going to work on the tulips, and I'm going to use the yellows again, first with the darker Y38 on half of each of the tulips, and then I'm going back with Y35 to do the other side of the tulip. And this again just gives it more shading, a little bit more variety. It's just more pleasing to look at. G05 is going to go in on half of the leaves, and then I'm going to use G07 on the other half of the leaves and on the stems. Once again, just using two colors can make a big difference in how it appears rather than just being one color throughout. Next, I'm going to color the pot using BV000, and I'll cover the entire pot except for the heart area. And then BV13 on the edges, because the edges of things that are especially round look darker than those in the front. So that's the reason you do that. And then I'll use RV000 again to soften the edges and R29 to fill in the heart. And the pot is ready to go. The front of the birdhouse is going to be B01, just coating that entire front. And then on the edges, on the side, it's B02 because that's going to be a little bit darker. Now I initially used the blue also for that stripe, but I changed my mind and decided I wanted a bigger contrast, so I used the R29 for that and the bird perch. For the roof, I'm going to be using the browns again, so we're going to start with E35 for the majority of the roof. Then the area underneath the roof is E57 because that is going to look darker, and then E59 on the edges of the roof and on the little loop that you would hang the birdhouse with. Then I applied another coat of E35 to the main roof. And the last part was to use my micron pen to put in little shingle marks on the roof, just to make it a little, again, more realistic and give it more interest, really. I'm going to work on this bunny next, and to start off I'm going to do the jacket. I'm using some reds for this, but it's going to be more pinkish in appearance than red, so if you want to say light red, that might work, but to me it's more of a pink in the end. So the dark color I'm using here is R27, and I'm using it on the edges of the jacket, anywhere where you're going to have some shadow or some darkness. So underneath the arms, along the edges of the jackets themselves. And then R22 is going to be used over the same area as the dark color. It's just going to be used to blend out the line of the darker color and bring the rest of that color out. And then I'm going to fill in with R02. And this looks okay, but as I mentioned, often when you use three colors, it starts to fade out. The lighter colors wash out or lighten the darker colors. So I definitely did this jacket twice. using the same exact method, R27, then R22 to bring it all out, and then finishing it with R02. So I hope you'll agree that's pretty simple to do that, and you get a nice look out of it using those three colors. Now for his pants, I'm going to use just two colors. We're going to start out with B02, which is the darkest of the blues that I'll use. I'm putting those in the creases, on the edges, areas where you're naturally going to expect more shadows to be. And then I'm going to use B01 to blend out the edges and add the highlight color in the middle. So not three colors in this case, but only two. Now you could use three, but I've chosen just to use the two, keep it simple, and then I'm going back with B02 to add in some more of that shading so that it's more evident that there is a difference, and then just lightening out the edges a little bit. Next, I'm going to work on his shirt. That is with C's, so I'm using C1 on the collar and on the front. And then I'm going to go down 2 steps to C00 and use that to just blend out the edges of the first gray. And then I'll use black 110 for his buttons. Now I'm going to work on the body itself. So R20 is what I use inside his ears for that little bit of pink. And then I'm using E35, the lightest of the browns that I've been using today, to cover every area of the bunny where he would have fur. So that's the face, the back of the head, his hands, and his feet. So I'm just going to cover every bit of area here with the E35. That's the main color. I thought the first coat was a little bit streaky, so I went ahead and put in a second coat of E35 to get a little bit better coverage. Especially when working with darker colors, you'll notice the streaking a bit more. So a good way to fix that is just to go ahead and put at least 2 coats. Sometimes you need even 3 to get a good amount of coverage. So I did that, and I use E57 to add a little bit more shadow and shading around the face, mostly around the edges, a little bit on the ears, and then a little bit on the feet. And then I'm going to bring in E59 at the very end, and I'm going to use that on the little paws at the bottom where he's got pads. And again, if you see any areas that are a little bit too dark or streaky, just cover again with your E35 and E57. I decided to give his little shirt a pattern, so I'm using my navy twin tone and I'm putting in tiny little hearts. It just adds some variety to the shirt. Then I'm going to do his tail. That's a really easy color combo. Again, it's going to be C1, just streaking in a little bit on the edges and bottom, and then using COO to lighten up the edges. I decided to add another coat of R20 for his ears, and then at this point I just need to work on his egg, and once that's done, he's complete. So I thought a little bit of light violet would be nice here, so I start out with BV000 and then adding some dark BV13 on the very edges, and then going back with BV00 again and lightening that out. Then I decided I wanted it a bit lighter even yet on the edges where the purple fades out to white, so I came back with colorless blending to do that. And that completes all the coloring for the images I'm going to decorate these pages with. Now it's time to cut these out using the included dies. So remember I told you about all the different die sets. Well, they all include the matching dies for each image. So the key to using these dies is just to take it and put it around your image. I look straight down as much as possible at that die and just make sure that the edges of the image are inside of the die. Then it's also very important to secure the die in place so it doesn't move around on you. And again, for that, I really recommend the Spellbinder's Best Ever Craft Tape. So to cut all these out, I'm just going to use the dies for every single image, pulling out each of the die sets, the die and stamp sets rather, that I used, and secure it just like you're seeing here, and I will cut them all out. So I have cut them, and here they are, all the individual pieces. I wanted you to get a good look at them. And you can see how nicely the dies cut these images out. So here's the page we're working on again, and just as a reminder, there is that cut through where the door is on the front. And this is where I'm going to bring in the double-sided bunny. So this is called again Bunny Front Back, or Bunny FB. It's so cute. There's a lot of details in this, as you saw when we were coloring it, and when you put them together, you get both the front and the back view of this cute bunny. So I'm going to put this in the doorway, and I'm only going to put glue in a few places, his paw, ear, and his feet, because that's where it's going to be attached to the outer edge of the doorway, and then of course the feet would be on the stoop. And that'll keep it in place nicely. This will also still allow for the door to shut, and you can kind of get a peekaboo effect. I thought it would be cute for him to be holding a little envelope, some happy mail that he's excited that he just got at the mailbox. That's what I kind of envision anyway, and he's bringing it in to see what it's all about. And then I'm going to put the wreath that I colored and set that at the top of the door frame. You can see the windows a little bit through it. Here's where I'm putting the cute little birdhouse just to decorate that stoop a bit more. And it's basically done. I'm going to put a sentiment on that, but we'll get to that towards the end. So now let's work on the back side of this. We've got these flower arrangements that I colored earlier. We've got some daffodils, some tulips, nothing more spring than that, right? And we've got this mail holder, and I'm just putting that in the back of it, just using a tiny bit of glue to set it in place. And I want it to look like it's stuffed with mail. So I'm just putting glue strategically for that so that it can stick to the other piece of mail and to the box itself. And then this can all be glued to the page. I don't know about you, but this little detail is so cute. This box full of that mail is quite adorable. Now I'm going to take a look at the vines with the flowers that I had colored and cut out. I'm going to place this over the top of the frame, and I cut off the very stem at the end. That's just a personal preference. I don't like that long stem. I don't know why. I just don't. So you can certainly leave your stem in place. You could cut this in half. You could use just one. I mean, it's really up to you what you want to do. Here, I thought it would be nice to try to cover the entire frame at the top, just to give it sort of an, I don't know, almost like an arbor feel, but of course that makes no sense really because it's an inside scene technically if he's standing on the outside of the house. So maybe it's just like a decoration that over the arch of the living room or the kitchen or something like that. I mean, really, paper crafting is all about your imagination. So really, there's nothing you can do that's wrong necessarily. You really just need to pick what you think is best and go with it. And that's what I did here. And I hope you enjoyed seeing that version of it as well. And now I had told you that I was going to add a sentiment, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm putting it back into my mini Misty. And then I'm going to use the Sentiment Bloom, which comes from this new Friend Sentiment set. And it's pretty new. It was released February 1st of this year, 2023. So I just want to point out that if you're going to stamp a page like this, even if it's not decorated yet, if you want to put a sentiment in, just make sure that folded piece on the left side, that it's pushed down enough so that when you close the window of your platform, it doesn't bind up because of that piece sitting up too high. Once I've got this in place, then these two pages are done, and I'm going to insert it into the book. So looking at that again, let's open it up. You see this beautiful pink interior. I really love that. So much better than plain paper. And then I'm going to put some glue here on the spine of the page, and I'm going to butt the edge of that up to the edge of the fold in the front cover. And that way, when you close your journal up, there will be nothing in the way to bind it. In the next episode, I'm going to make another page, possibly two, and cover at least 3 sides. I might even try to go for 4 if we can, because we've got a total of 6 pages or 12 sides to work on in this journal. And I want to be sure I get this done by Easter. It takes a little while. This one took longer than the others will, I think, because I did so much cutting and also coloring. So I'm going to see how it goes. I hope you enjoyed seeing this and that you'll be back for the next episode. Likely it will be 1 week or possibly 2, but definitely no later than that. So thank you for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.